Hello, guys. I'm on.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm good.
Awesome. Linda is just logging in now. She had some technical difficulties. She will be in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
So you're busy in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I have a court hearing tomorrow, so I'm just I didn't want to go all the way back to Seattle from the East Coast, so I stopped here because I have to be here on Friday morning. So I'm just
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay, that's great. Seems like it's been a busy time for you in court.
it's been a busy year. So very busy.
Yeah, that's never a good thing, is it, from the
No,
consumer's perspective, when
not
you're
at all.
busy?
Yes. Hey, so question. Do you guys want to go through and ask me that list of questions, which I think are great, and then I can go through that cut down version of the slides I sent you?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that
Okay.
will be a good plan.
And do I need to upload those slides to this program somehow, or how does that work?
I think Linda will. Have you made changes to that, or are we just using them as it was?
I sent all of you guys a set of slides this morning.
Oh,
Yeah, I kind of, there was one or two slides I added in that I thought would be helpful.
okay. I will check on that now. I'm going to go check on that now, and then Linda can either run that, or she can give it to you to click through. It
Okay,
depends which you prefer.
sure.
Okay, let me just go double check on those slides now. I want to see that I got them. Hold on.
Okay. I sent them to you twice. Once probably about seven time is it? One time, but maybe about 7:30, and then one time about a minute ago. Oops, I'm gonna get out of my.
Hey, technology. Just checking out. Okay, both your slides have come through.
Okay.
Okay, great. Did you notice? Okay, Bill, so we are going to let you drive your slides.
Okay.
So when we get to that point, Linda will just give you the option to control the screen, and
Okay.
then you'll obviously just click through as you would normally.
Okay. And
Um,
you guys can upload them from your side.
have it open on your side, but yeah, we'll upload it on our side, and then we'll give you access.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, cool. Linda is just for some reason we have challenges with our webinars. I'm not sure if it's our internet here or what it is, but she's sorting herself out now so that she can get that presentation open for you.
Okay. No worries.
So we should be there any minute.
I'm just
But
watching.
Interesting article this morning on the listeria. Okay.
It was.
Okay, hold on a sec. Okay.
Hi, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
That's good. Okay, so we've got some. I can't get my laptop started this morning, so this afternoon. So we'll just go straight from where you are at. Because I don't want to waste your time. I know that it's really, really precious. You're in as an organizer. You're in as a Dell. Am I right, Steph? Sorry, Bill. I'm just confirming some things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will send you a request now to share your screen, which means that I'll be able to see the slides, and then you'll be able to see me too. So I'm switching on my camera, hopefully. Here we go. So you should be able to see me. Is your camera on? I'll put it on from my. I've sent a webcam request asking you to put your camera on.
I'm in my bathrobe and I just got up about 15 minutes.
Okay, no problem. We don't have to have your camera on. That's all good. That's all good. Okay, right now I'm sending you a screen share request.
Okay.
Okay, so it should be coming through to you now.
I see it. Okay,
so now if you click on that, I'll then be able to see your screen.
And I click on it. I'm sorry. I can see your screen.
Okay.
Is there some place to click?
Yeah, on the request it should say. Did you see the screen share request?
All that I see is it looks like I don't see a screen share request. It just
that's coming through.
Your screen popped up.
Okay, so I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay, it says show my, and it says show my screen.
There we go.
Do you see my screen now?
I see your screen. Steph, won't you just get my eye, please?
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet, because the PowerPoint I don't think is. I can just see connected to go to webinar. If you put the PowerPoint onto presenter mode, so in other words, go as if you're going to. I can see your mouse is moving. Are you using two monitors or just one?
I'm on my travel laptop. I'm just trying to find. I'm trying to find the. Let's see. I'll just open up Outlook and open it from there. There's so much on my screen, I can't see the PowerPoint.
Okay, I've got. I can open it from my side if we need to.
Second. Okay, I've got my PowerPoint open. And so, do I go to share?
No. Just go straight to the presentation mode. You don't need to do anything else. There we go. Okay, so now that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. That's it.
All right.
Okay, so I'm just quickly opening the mail that I sent you with the questions because I'm now at another computer.
I sent those to Adele this morning, just in a simpler format. Do you have that?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't catch that.
I said I sent them to you guys this morning via email. So you could, yeah, whatever questions you have, I'll certainly answer.
No, I know you will. I know you will. That's not a problem. Okay, I've got that. Okay, I'm not sure what else you've got open, Bill. I'm just shutting down Outlook and things like that because those can interfere with the recording if messages come through and what have you, because it obviously picks up on anything that may already be open.
I've shut Outlook.
Okay, cool. Okay, I think we are ready to go. I'm just making 100% sure. I'm just logging out of Skype because that can also give us a problem. Okay. Okie dokes. All right, so I'm going to shut off my camera and then we'll just have the voices. So you can, we'll record just from the voices. What I'm also going to do is when you're talking, I'm going to mute myself so that we don't have any background noise from from my side. There's traffic and what have you. So I'm going to mute and then I'll unmute myself. So from your side, you might see that I've been muted. Don't stress about that. As soon as you've finished talking, I'll then, I'll then ask the next question. So go. I'm not going to interrupt you while you're talking. I'll wait until you pause and then I'll ask another question. Okay.
Okay.
Okie dokes. Here you see there's an aeroplane flying over now. So so we don't want to have any of that on the recording. Okie dokes. Here we go. Thanks, Phil.
You're welcome.
I just want you to just do me a favor, Bill. When you click, if you can just click onto the presentation, because what we can see at the moment are all your icons at the bottom of the screen. There we go. They're gone now. Thank you. Because otherwise we'll record those.
Okay.
So it's moving on your side. You're okay?
Yep. There we go.
Okay. You're right. So you've got complete control of the presentation. I'm not going to press anything. You move through the slides as you're comfortable to.
So what I thought might be helpful, just to, because I thought your questions were really good, and sound is fine, isn't it?
Yeah, sounds fine.
And why don't you just go through and ask me whatever questions from that list you guys want, and then turn it over. Then, like when you're done with that, just turn it over for me to to go through these slides, and then at the end you can ask me any questions, and then that'll be the end. Does that make sense?
Okay. Cool beans. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, guys. All right. Here we go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Food Safety Culture workshop. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Bill Marler. Bill's been in South Africa a few times and helped us with our Listeria workshops. And today we've got him on the line to chat about his perspective in terms of food safety culture. Bill, won't you kind of give us a little bit of information about yourself? What have you been doing for the last 25 years in terms of food safety?
Well, I've been involved in food safety since the Jack in the Box outbreak that occurred in the United States in 1993. That really, in many respects, was the start of sort of a real focus on food safety, both from a governmental, industry, and consumer perspective. Over 700 people were sickened, 4 children died. And it really took the beef industry to its knees. Since then, I've been involved in every major and sometimes minor foodborne illness outbreak that's occurred in the U.S. and have been involved in consulting abroad in Europe, Australia, now in South Africa, and have spoken on food safety topics dozens of times a year all over the world. So over the last 25 years, I've sort of had my finger not only in suing companies who poison, sicken, and kill people, but also in trying to prevent foodborne illnesses from occurring at all.
If we look at your career in litigation, do you think that a food safety culture plays a role in, or has played a role in any of the cases that you've been involved with? Can you think of any examples where the culture of the company has actually been significant in relation to the case?
That's a great question. It's actually one that Frank Yanis from Walmart and I've spoken about numerous times over the last several years. And many would be surprised that the food safety director of one of the largest companies in the world and I share nearly identical viewpoints on preventing foodborne illnesses, but in fact we do. And it really does come down to a culture of paying attention to food safety. There are more than numerous examples of companies that don't focus on a culture of food safety. And I think many people define the culture of food safety a little differently. The way I look at it is having a sort of a business model that obviously is interested in making food and making a profit off of making food, but also having the ability for your people in your company, for the process in your company to be focused on food safety. And many companies pay attention to things other than making safe food. An example, fairly recently in the US, a company called Chipotle, a fast-growing, fast food, fresh, sort of Mexican restaurant chain, had a series of salmonella, norovirus, and E. coli outbreaks. Their focus really was on convincing consumers that food safety meant local agriculture, non-GMO agriculture, non-antibiotic agriculture, all of which have some bearing on a broad perspective of food safety. But they took their eye off the ball of keeping hot things hot and cold things cold and paying attention to where they were getting their food products from. And it took their stock price from a high of 750 US to a low of 300. It's completely changed that company's perspective. So those are the sorts of things when I think about food safety culture, it's creating a spot where everyone in your business has a place to tell the people who make decisions, hey, we should be doing something better. We should be doing something that focuses on food safety.
I have to confess that on our recent trip to Paris, we actually took ourselves off to a Chipotle restaurant and wondered what you would think about it, considering the problems that Chipotle have been having.
Well, they brought in a number of people post the problems in 2015, some really high quality food safety people. And, they had, sort of one major Clostridium perfringens case in the United States just recently this year. I mean, there are a lot of Chipotles. I think it's thousands or so restaurant, and it's when you have a model that's that large, it really requires a lot of command and control. When you have managers who come in, come out, employees who come in and come out, it takes a real focus on making sure food safety is really important. And I think that's going to be an ongoing problem for their business model. There are companies that like Taco Bell and McDonald's, Jack in the Box, who lived through the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak, saw the problems, and their way of dealing with control is a lot of fail-safe food safety mechanisms that don't allow for sort of random things to happen when you have employees that may be there for a week or two, or a manager who's there for a month or three. They try to make it so that there's less ability to make mistakes. It's going to be a challenge for a company like Chipotle, who's sort of prides themselves on fresh, local, making the food there in front of you. It's a challenge, and it's not going to be easy, but it doesn't mean that they can't focus on it, or frankly, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't focus on it.
And if they do focus on it, it should contribute positively towards their business outcomes. That share price should be, hopefully going back up.
Right. I mean, if you're not having foodborne illness outbreaks and you're not in the news for poisoning and sickening people, it's highly likely, everything else being equal, it's highly likely that your stock price will rise and people will come to your restaurant. So.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's actually a have to have when it comes to, business success.
Right. I mean,
what advice would you give companies to avoid litigation? And don't take it personally, but we don't really want to be facing you in court. So how can we avoid this?
Well, sometimes you can't always avoid sickening people. I mean, sometimes something happens. There's there could be a failure in a manufacturing process. There could be an incredibly highly toxic load of romaine lettuce or tomatoes that overwhelm a system. Those kinds of things happen. I mean, the focus should be on, how do you create a system that minimizes that? And, my view is the whole idea behind food safety culture is an idea of implementing, HACCP. Now, HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control points, to me is sort of like the building blocks below a food safety culture. You can create a HACCP plan, you can create those building blocks, but if you don't have a culture that implements the HACCP plan and sees that HACCP plan as the thing that protects you from both poisoning, your customers, being involved in litigation, having that impact negatively on your business model and your stock price and your profitability, all those things have to sort of come together. And to me, the best way to avoid, litigation and sickening people and having your stock price go down or your income go down is, to focus on the things that prevent foodborne illness. And not just to focus on it, but to, check that in fact it's working, to document it. Because documenting it, having a checklist, checking the checklist, those are things that, create that, food safety culture and prevent those building blocks of HACCP from collapsing under you.
So you're saying that HACCP is an important factor when it, in terms of creating the culture or supporting the culture. What other factors have you seen that can really be significant as far as creating the right culture within an organization, assuming that there is a strong HACCP system in place, which is based on solid science?
So, almost all organizations, whether it's a small mom and pop, restaurant to, an enormously large corporation that manufactures food or a large restaurant chain, the real key is getting buy-in from the board of directors or the president of the company or the owner of the company, that this is an important part of what they do. The board, the owner, the CEO, they understandably are focused on the profitability of their company. And I think sometimes the challenge for them is to understand that if, food producing company, that what they're making is not, a widget. It's not a piece of plastic. What they're making is a food product that is going to go into someone's body. It's not just a piece of manufactured good. It's something that people, ingest into themselves. And therefore, it really requires the CEO, the board of directors, the owner of the company to sort of be more open to that part of food safety culture which allows for the people who are on the line, the director of food safety, the management, the people who are producing the food, cooking the food, buying ingredients, to be able to have the ability to go maybe not directly to the CEO or to the board, but have a process where ideas can flow and there's an open sharing of ideas. I can't tell you how many times over the last decade or so where I've been speaking at a large food safety conference and someone will come up to me and like, oh, I wish my CEO would pay attention to you because I can't get them to invest in X, Y, or Z to prevent this. So, it's really comes from in some respects, comes from the top, that the CEOs, the board of directors, owners have to be open to ideas both from others in the company and from outside, influencers.
Do you think that culture can be learned? Can a CEO change? Have you seen examples of this where a company's gone from a negative culture to a positive culture?
That's a very good question. I think it's sometimes it takes disasters to change people's behavior. And that's an unfortunate human occurrence. And I'm not quite sure why we can't seem to sometimes learn from other people's, mistakes. We've spoken before when I was in South Africa just this last March, how remarkably similar the listeriosis outbreak is to what happened in the US in the Jack in the Box outbreaks 25 years ago. The way it was discussed in South Africa, sort of was that deja vu moment for me of the way things were being discussed in the US during the Jack in the Box outbreak. I think we have a real problem of, not being able to learn from other people's mistakes. And I think that's part of the need for a food safety culture that allows for someone in a position of authority to say, gee, look what just happened there, or how can I avoid that? So the answer to your question is, can you learn it? And can CEOs learn from their mistakes or mistakes of others? That, to me, is how we learn, or how we should learn. The real question is, are people open to doing that? And I think sometimes that's not just a challenge of CEOs. It's not just a challenge of board of directors. It's frankly a challenge for all of us. And you know that drinking and driving is problematic. You know that speeding is problematic. But unfortunately, people do that all the time, even then when they see horrible consequences. And I don't think that's a whole lot different than a CEO or a board of directors, producing food and seeing something really negatively happen to a company and go, oh, it won't happen to us. Well, yes, it can happen to you.
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, there is that human nature aspect that sometimes means we have to bump our heads before we are open to advice. But having said that, if you look at the US and your experience in working with companies in the US, do you think that in general the food companies in the US have a stronger food safety culture than they did 25 years ago?
Yeah, I think yes. I think in some sectors that's true, and I think the best example of that is from 1993 to about 2003, about that decade, about 90% of my law firm's work and revenue was E. coli 0157H7 cases linked to hamburger consumption. But through a process of government intervention, industry changing their behaviors, consumers asking for safer food. The number of E. coli cases that I have in my office linked to hamburger has steadily decreased to the point where it's just a very small part, if at all, of anything that I do. To me, that's an absolute success, and I think that can be translated to all sectors of food. And I think in some respects that has been translated across sectors to food. But again, you see people still thinking that it won't happen to me, or it happened 10 years ago, it won't happen again. And a good example of, you know, there was a romaine lettuce E. coli outbreak in the U.S. this last spring that sickened over 200 people, killed 5 people, and it was almost an identical outbreak to what happened 12 years ago, linked to spinach. And if you had interviewed me in January of this year and said, "How's the produce industry doing?" I said, "Well, if you look at the number of outbreaks and the frequency and the numbers of people, it was significantly down." But then you have this outbreak in March, and if you ask me now, I'd say they clearly weren't paying attention. And if fundamentally they weren't paying attention because they were utilizing water to irrigate that flowed past 100,000 cow feedlot. And you kind of ask yourself, what were they thinking? Or more importantly, what were they not thinking? So again, that's why I'm more and more and more convinced that although there have been successes, it's a never-ending process to keep food safety culture up front. Someone over the last decade should have probably scratched their head and said to somebody, "Hey, we're growing more and more and more lettuce in Yuma, Arizona. There's 100,000 cows a few miles away. Our water source goes by that cow field. Cows have E. coli. Don't you think our lettuce and therefore our consumers are at risk?" To me, that seems pretty self-evident. But again, it's going to be fascinating through the course of litigation to find out why people weren't thinking about that. And I get to do that. I get to ask all those questions. So it will be fascinating, but it also is going to be incredibly expensive for them.
And you're still not eating romaine lettuce?
Not bagged romaine lettuce.
Okay. Well, on a more serious note, you've obviously watched what's been happening in South Africa, and we've got to move on. According to the Minister of Health, the outbreak is officially over. The numbers are back to what is considered normal in South Africa. Do you think food safety strategy or food safety culture is an important part of the strategy that we should be considering going forward? And, what specific advice would you give us?
Well, I'm obviously, full disclosure, I'm involved as a consultant for the victims against Tiger Brands in the class action litigation. And I certainly pay attention to, what's going on in South Africa. But I also realize that it takes sometimes multiple problems to get everyone to agree that, they need to change. Just this morning, there's, an article, in South African press that the tainted product from, earlier this year is still on shelves in rural areas. That creates, obviously, some significant changes or significant problems that need changes. So again, it's an ongoing, to me, food safety culture is an ongoing process that companies who produce food have to constantly remind themselves of how important what they do is to their customers. And they have to get out of they have to stop thinking about this thing as a commodity, as a thing, and realize how important it is to the people that that are consuming their product, that are feeding it to their families, that are feeding it to their children, and realize that it's an everyday challenge to focus on food safety. It's an everyday challenge to pay attention to what's going on in the environment, and I might mean an environment, or paying attention to what's happening to other companies and what's coming around the corner, and implementing things to focus on food safety. It's going to be an ongoing challenge, and in a country where, whether it's the U.S. or South Africa, where there's broad divides between urban and rural, and educated and non-educated. Those are ongoing challenges. But the company that's producing food has a responsibility to produce safe food and to make sure that food gets off the shelves, whether or not it's in a rural area or urban area.
Well, I know you've got some, specific slides and some very specific advice that you'd like to give us. So, maybe you'd like to take us through that now in terms of, what you've seen as best practice to avoid litigation.
Sure. In some respects, these are slides that I've shown, many times in many different places, and I think they underscore sort of the discussion that we've had. And planning against litigation, the things that I found it's very similar to what we've just discussed. It's really focused on identifying the things in your facility, whether it's a restaurant or a manufacturing facility. Identify the hazards that can cause a problem, and making sure that you do have committed people, and asking the question almost every day, what's the culture? If your culture is, we need to get this food out the door as cheaply as possible, at the highest price we can, that's not a culture of food safety. That's a culture of profitability. And it doesn't necessarily mean you can't have profitability without, with a food safety culture. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And one of the things I think for whether you're a mom and pop restaurant or a large manufacturer, is you can have the best food safety culture in the world internally, but if you're not mandating that or requiring that of your supply chain, you can be, in a sense, importing those foods, contaminated process into your plant, and it can be a disaster. And we've seen multiple outbreaks linked to food products or component parts of products that were contaminated that caused disasters. Another thing I always tell manufacturers is that there are a lot of people who regulate them. There are a lot of people who advise them, and involving them not necessarily in how your product is made, but involving them in a way that you can learn from them, because most regulators don't, and whether that's in South Africa or the U.S. or the EU, most regulators don't necessarily view themselves as a police force. They view themselves as educators, and paying attention to your educators, I think in the long run, help you, especially if there's a disaster that happens that is sort of that black swan event, something that wasn't anticipated. If you have regulators who say, company X has been reaching out to us for 10 years. They've been learning, they've been doing everything correctly. And boy, this thing just happened and we don't even know how it happened. And that's a much better public view of that company than a disaster happening and the public entities are saying, this has been a terrible company. They've been, they stop us at the gates. They don't let us inspect. They've had multiple problems. You can understand why inviting regulators in, I think, makes some sense.
And I think, sorry, well, in terms of an outbreak, what's your advice? Because it could happen to us again.
Sure. So, several years ago, in fact, I think it was a dozen years ago, in following the the spinach E. coli outbreak in 2006, I wrote an op-ed about sort of what do you do if you're a CEO, what do you do during an outbreak? And I sort of, imagine that phone call from, sitting at your desk, and imagine that phone call comes in, or, your food safety director comes in and says, I just found out, from government ministry that, our product is linked to an E. coli outbreak, a listeria outbreak. You can imagine, as the CEO or board of directors, getting that phone call and having a pretty big sinking feeling. So what do you do? The first thing, gets back to the slide that I just went over, is having that pre-existing condition with the people that regulate you. So you can quickly have that conversation, as difficult as it might be, is what's going on, where's the data, what do we do about it, how do we, is it the data correct, and all that has to happen very quickly, because the first thing you make sure you want to do is you don't want to drag your feet saying that it wasn't you, or the ministry's wrong, or so having that pre-existing relationship with the people that regulate you allow you to have trust in their analysis, so they have trust in you that you're going to do the right thing. So, if someone shows up, even if you're a little bit questioning the data because it's early, and sometimes that's true. Sometimes outbreaks are figured out based on a very small amount of data, and a CEO or a food safety manager is in a position of, what do we do with limited data? And I think the fallback position has always got to be doing the right thing for your consumers, and that's, to me, immediately stopping production. You can then, working in conjunction with or in parallel to the ministry or to the health authorities, is you should have your own ability. This is obviously from a large manufacturing point of view, have your own ability to do your own investigation, or at least try to get to the bottom of what happened, or in the unlikelihood didn't happen in your facility. So the next thing is assuming that the outbreak is in fact your fault. And sometimes this is a hard thing for companies to admit. They always want to point the finger at somebody else, or say that the data is wrong, or it's the consumer's fault. If your product is sickening and poisoning people, you need to own it. You need to embrace the fact that it happened. And my next point is, you can't blame the consumers. If your product has a pathogen in it that can sicken or kill people, during an outbreak is not the time to say, oh, consumers didn't keep it cold enough, or consumers didn't keep it hot enough. The time to educate consumers on the risk of your products is before an outbreak, to help prevent the outbreak from even happening. So companies, in my view, who blame consumers, who blame the government, they are the ones that don't recover very quickly or don't recover at all. The sixth thing that I have seen where companies have done a better job than companies who don't is, reaching out to consumers, whether they're represented by lawyers or not, reaching out and go, what can we do to help you? If it's a child who's died or someone who's been injured and can't work, what can they do to help their consumers? That's not only good for public relations, it also, and this is from experience, also blunts the anger that consumers have towards companies that have poisoned and sickened people. The next thing is, and I've seen this in the US, specifically with Jack in the Box, is when you've been through an outbreak and you've figured out what happened and you've figured out what can be done to prevent it, and then you've created systems to help prevent that in the future, is sharing that information openly with everyone. It gives consumers confidence that you've figured this out and you're going to try to prevent this from happening again. And you're teaching other companies from your mistakes so they don't make the same mistake again. Because what's important about that aspect of my seventh point is that, not only does meat sales for the company that had a listeriosis outbreak fall through the roof or fall through the floor, but meat from other companies that aren't implicated falls through the floor. And so if you're a company that has gone through an E. coli outbreak linked to hamburger, and you have all this information to prevent the next one, and you don't share it, another company in the same sector could have an outbreak a year later, and the price of hamburger falls through the floor again, or consumers stay away from hamburger. And so these things are integrated, and so teaching everyone how to prevent these outbreaks is really important. So to me, that's how you avoid an outbreak. And I have sort of been on the ground with this, with what you guys are dealing with, and this is just a tragedy that the extent of which is pretty rare to see anywhere in the world. I mean, there certainly have been larger foodborne illness outbreaks. In Japan, they've had enormous E. coli outbreaks linked to sprouts. Germany had a large outbreak linked to sprouts. To my knowledge, and I think I'm pretty aware of outbreaks that have happened, this listeria outbreak in South Africa has just been an enormous tragedy, for obviously the families implicated, for the company itself, and, for the, confidence in the government. And it's going to be interesting to see how this changes, if it changes, the food safety culture in South Africa. I have been very impressed with the investigation done by the health authorities in South Africa. I've been very impressed with the changes that appear to be sort of moving through the political system. And I have great hope that that's going to help long term. I'm a little less certain that the food industry, specifically the Tiger brands, has really gotten the message. And I think time will tell. So, where does South Africa go from here? I think we need to sort of, obviously focus the people need to focus on, making these industries and government accountable, through the democratic process. I think that food safety needs to be always more transparent, and I think more information needs to be out to the public about how this outbreak happened and why, and perhaps through the course of the litigation that I'm consulting with, there'll be more information that's available to the public. But ultimately, from my perspective, it's the point where that culture of food safety that allows a company, an industry, government, and consumers to work together to prevent the next outbreak or prevent outbreaks at all. I think keeping things science-based, not necessarily emotional based. It's hard to sometimes unwind emotion from a tragedy like this, but you need to focus on the science behind food safety and what you can do to prevent it, and food safety problems to prevent that. And at the end, taking care of the people who were harmed. And I think unfortunately, thus far in the South African situation, those people have been sort of put to the wayside. But I think over time the legal system, although it's a slow process, whether it's in the U.S. or in South Africa, I am always very confident that justice in the long run will prevail. So with that, any questions? It's been a great opportunity to talk to you guys. But if there's any other questions or that you have, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your advice. I think at the end of the day, although you've often faced companies in litigation, there's a lot of value that you've been able to add through the process to try and help people from getting there. So thank you very much. Thank you for the contribution that you've made to try and improve food safety in South Africa. We really do appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you. And we'll see you again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. Have a good day in Vegas.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, sir. No. Okay, he's logged out. Why don't you just send him a WhatsApp and say thanks?